Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Technology and Ethics panel of FinTECHTalents Virtual Tour North America. My name is Theo Lau, and I'm the founder of Unconventional Ventures. Now, today we have an amazing panel of people from literally all walks of life. And I'm so excited that we're going to be able to spend the next 45 minutes to talk about technology ethics and something that is so near and dear to all of us. To start with, we have Katia Walsh from Levi Strauss. Hi, Katia.
Hi, everyone.
And then we have Noelle Silver. Amongst the many hats that she's wearing, she's also the founder of AI Leadership and Institute.
Hi, nice to see you, everyone.
And then we have Megan Gordon, partner in Clifford.
Hello, everyone.
And we have, last but not least, Terry Hickey from CIBC.
Hi, everyone.
So let's do a quick round robin and introduce each one of us so that our audience can have a little bit better idea on what all of us are doing. And so I'll start. My name is Theo. Again, I'm the founder of Unconventional Ventures. So amongst the few things that we do, apart from the fact that now we are grounded, we're not allowed to travel anymore. We do speaking in a lot of different events for FinTech, especially we run a podcast called One Vision where we tell stories with a purpose. And we also write a lot. So look us up on social media. Katia, let's start with you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm delighted to spend some time with you today. Technology and ethics are very near and dear to my heart. I have spent my entire career driving digital transformations outside within companies as first consultant and advisor with Forrester Research, and then driving digital transformation from inside companies in various industries, including financial services, telecommunications, and now fashion apparel retail.
That is super awesome. And Noelle?
Everyone, yes, I'm Noelle Silver, and I basically, I guess, come from the perspective of an applied AI engineer. I've been on many different teams and got passionate about the area of ethics and specifically artificial intelligence because I joined a product in its infancy known as Alexa. Some of you may know it, and grew very rapidly in that product. And as I, went on that journey, I learned a lot about what worked, what didn't work, and what I really think would be important for any up and coming product as they start building a team. I, use a term inclusive engineering, how important it is that ethics start kind of in the DNA of the people who build the technology. So I also run a brand called Lovefluencers, which is all about really democratizing the voices that are speaking and becoming thought leaders in this space. So thanks so much for having me. I'm really grateful to be here.
Super psyched to have you. And next we have Megan.
Hi, everyone. I'm the lawyer on the panel. I'm a partner at Clifford. Always great to have a lawyer on the panel. Very exciting. And I'm also the one of the co-heads of our U.S. tech practice, and I especially do a lot of data privacy and security. And I'm so excited for this panel because I just think it's so timely. So many things going on in the world. We're seeing just an abundance of new issues coming up. So I really look forward to discussing it with y'all.
Thanks, Megan. But with challenges comes opportunities. And now you remind me I need to be careful what we say since we do have a lawyer on the panel. And then we have Terry.
Hi there. So Terry Hickey, I'm the Chief Analytics Officer for CIBC. I've been here for the past 2 years, and before this, I was leading artificial intelligence and advanced analytics for IBM Global Services globally. So I spent a lot of time somewhere else other than Toronto, Canada, as in my home. I'm super excited to be here today talking about ethics and data because it's extremely important, obviously, for all of us that do banking, and we want to make sure that all of our information is kept to only those that absolutely need to have it, and we need to make sure that our models are appropriately tuned and inclusive to Noelle's term. So I think that we'll have a great discussion today.
Well, thank you, everyone. So between COVID-19 and unrest due to social injustice, And now all of us are at home. 2020 has been anything but a typical year. But with that, we have also seen an acceleration of technology adoption. So just look at events, for example. Now we're doing everything virtually. There's a saying, which, we can judge whether or not it's overused or is real. Data is the new oxygen, right? And essential elements to fuel AI development. There are a lot of things that we can do more, though, to get insights out of data. So I want to reference a recent article I read on New York Times about a mental health startup. And they are using data that brings about questions on where do we draw the line, especially when it comes to something that is so personal. We're talking about mental health, but the same with banking, right? Money is personal. How do we balance that need to improve customer experience, the need to grow and offer more values to customers with ethics? So Katia, I'd like to start with you because I like what you said previously with Lisa in a recording that consumers should not need a PhD in consumer privacy or data or a law degree to understand how their data is being used. And I know personally, I would read through or jump through the pages and pages and pages of this is what we're doing with your data without actually looking into it. So what are your thoughts?
It's ironic, Theo, that you have both a PhD and a lawyer at this. I would reiterate what I said when I was speaking with Lisa, that consumers should not be expected to have that level of sophistication. And consumer privacy is paramount and sacred above everything else. So let me answer your question in 3 parts. Part 1 is about the context of all of this. We are in the midst of one of the biggest digital accelerations of the world, of any industry, of humankind. And I know it's an overused term, but it is overused because it is the reality. I'm sure we're personally witnessing every day in our daily lives, in our jobs, how much this crisis has moved everything to digital, including this particular event. So much so that it's anything that's not in moderation can actually be too much of a good thing. But the point is that every single company, every single organization, every single consumer today is going through digital transformation. So the context is important. So I want to talk a little bit about the context, a little bit about data and AI specifically, and then, of course, answer your question. The context is that the world has been digital for at least 25 years. We know the field of artificial intelligence dates much further back to the 1950s. But for the last 25 years, we've been living in a digital world. Most of our consumers that we talk about and talk to have been born digital and leading mobile first, if not mobile only lives. That's the reality. And it's digital that makes data big. And it's big data that makes artificial intelligence possible. And it's artificial intelligence that makes digital smart. So this virtuous circle has many different uses. And one of them is consumer experience. Today, we have the ability to provide a predictive, proactive, and truly personalized experience for each of the billions of people in the world. And Alexa is actually a great example of that. It listens to us. It intuits to us. It knows what we are going to do, sometimes before we ourselves know what we're going to do. And if you want a record of something, it's right there for you, even if we are told that only randomly do we get that recording. That's a whole other point. But consumer experience is a very big consequence and a goal of this virtuous circle of digital data and AI. Of course, there's another use that companies have benefited from, which is to improve the internal operations, to garner new efficiencies, to digitize. Think about how much companies today are saving because they're not traveling anymore. That is real money that companies can bank. But digitization also helps us automate things, and that creates other uses. And the savings in one area can then be used to still improve the consumer experience further. And then a third area is something that sets companies apart from others, from competitors, that gives them a real advantage, that differentiates them, that makes them unique, and that it ensures their ability to compete in the future. And that can be defined in many different ways. It depends on the industry, on the particular company, on the vision of a leader. And I'm sure Terry can tell us more about that. So that's the context. The second part of that is about data and AI as a capability. And you just said it, Theo. It's very, very powerful. And with great power comes a great responsibility. So let's talk about the question that you asked. How do you balance the need to improve consumer experience with ethics? And the answer is you cannot afford not to. It's not a matter of choice. It's an absolute must, which is why I said consumer privacy is paramount and sacred. And I cannot overemphasize that enough, because when that's not observed, it makes everything else moot. It makes a field that was created for good, for the betterment of humanity, it actually makes it a force for evil, and nobody wants that. So there are 3 C's that we need to balance, that we absolutely must incorporate as we work in this field, as consumers of this field, as leaders in this field, as change agents for the world. And those 3 C's are: 1, clarity of intention. Why do we need data? What are we going to use that data for? It doesn't mean that we have to justify every single use case. The days for that are long past. We're talking about developing ongoing capabilities. We're talking about living in a time of predictive engines surrounding us. We're talking about models of models that work all the time, continuously learn and improve and make our lives better. But we have to be clear when we create that capability, what it is for. And some of the things that I have been most proud in my career are not always about the revenue that I've helped drive. They're about improving that consumer experience. For example, in a company that I worked for, we were able to find out when a consumer's mobile device was about to stop working. So we were able to warn the consumer in a very clear way that that was about to happen and give them a choice, a replacement, not too many choices so as not to overwhelm them, so that they would not stop service. I mean, remember what happens to people when they lose sight of their mobile phone for just 1 second. They can't tolerate that. But it also is something that we need for work, and we need for communication, and we need to be able to keep track of our children. So it is a real force for good when it is used that way. So we were able to tell that about people. We gave them a heads up, and they were very grateful. And of course, we were able to retain our customers as a consequence. But that was a consequence. That wasn't the intention. So that clarity of purpose and clarity of intention is really important. Another thing that I'm really proud of is the use of data for social good, for social benefit. For example, use of mobility, anonymized data on consumers' mobility to help track, prevent, and stop the spread of, before COVID, Ebola and malaria in Africa, and now what we have been able to start doing to contain this horrible virus that has changed the world for us. So those are examples of really using data for good, including for healthcare. There's so much that our phones can tell us about our health if we only use that with clarity of purpose for good. So that's one. The second C is about communication. And this is to the point about consumers should not need a formal education in law or in communications in order to understand what's happening to their data. It's upon us, the companies, the organizations that serve our consumers, to explain very clearly, very succinctly, in a very empowering way, very transparently, what we use their data for. It is their data. Yes, data is a great asset for a company, just like its people, but at the end of the day, it's the consumer's data. So explain it to them very clearly, very succinctly, and empower them how their data is used. And that brings me to the third C, which is controls. And there are 2 types of controls. One control is that the consumer is in control. He or she or they are fully empowered in control to say yes or no. The second control, though, is trust but verify. Remember that? Controls within the company. And that's really, really important because while the clarity of purpose and intention is critical, you cannot always ensure that there wouldn't be a rogue bad agent. So it's upon us as leaders to ensure that we have in place the right controls. What data is being stored, who has access to it, how it's being used. And one example of how we do that is, of course, there are security controls, platform controls, etc. But there's also something that I've done in my career years ago, and that was very helpful, and it actually helps you attract and retain the right people as well. Data scientists, by definition, of people who want to use data for good. At the same time, in my current company and in previous companies, we have introduced the concept of a code of ethics for anyone who has access to consumer data, even if that data is completely anonymized and there's no personally identifiable information whatsoever. Just like there's a Hippocratic oath for medical doctors, there should be and is a code of ethics for anyone who uses consumer data. I hope this answers your question, Theo.
It does. And I think Noelle is really, really excited because I can literally see her bouncing off and just nodding.
I was like, I love code. Like, I love having a code. We actually at Microsoft created this thing called the Golden Rule. And it was literally a ruler, which I'm so big fan of puns. But it was a ruler. And on the back of it had these like reminders. And so I love this. And I think you're right. We have an industry of people that really are looking for guidance and looking for practices and toolkits to help them make good decisions. So I loved what you said. So thank you for sharing. I'll try to keep it contained when you all are talking.
No. I couldn't help but notice you were so excited. I'm like, oh my God. Okay.
That's a good thing. If you didn't write that down, write that down.
So Megan, what does the lawyer in you think about all this?
Yeah. No, I mean, I absolutely love the thought of industry principals getting more and more involved in this. But, I also understand the frustration with the reams and reams of pages that we all have to go through. Not that some of us have been involved in preparing some of those, but, and you have to click through. But, I'm going to just say that I think a lot of this has to do with how we've kind of, I feel like technology has developed faster than the regulations, and the regulations have tried to just have a tack on to the technology. And because of that, we have just these, I've not met a company that has said, I really want a confusing privacy policy, or, most clients do, especially want to protect their consumers. The problem is they also need to protect the company, and they're dealing, especially in the United States, they're dealing with 50 different states, they're dealing with federal laws, and then they're dealing with the international counterparts to that. So it's just this jumbled, I'm going to call it a jumbled mess of different regulations that they have to make sure to fit into all their policies in order to protect the company. But there's a question within that, which I think, Katia, you put well, which is, are we actually protecting the consumer within all of these regulations that have been put through? So I think to have more of a global standard, and I have to say, I really hope that the United States in particular can get to at least a federal standard on what everything should look like, so that we can cut these things down and cut back on the paper a little bit. But at the same time, I think it's just very important for us to have something, I totally agree, something simple for consumers to read through, because none of us like to read through it all. I think it's just kind of the way, I think that you see paper because of the number of regulations and because of everybody trying to comply. So I often don't think it's malicious. I think it's just an attempt at compliance because of some, just a jumbled amount of regulations.
It is. Because I remember a couple of years ago, I was working with a founder. He had a insurance tech startup in Germany, and he was trying to bring his services to the US. And after a year, he was like pulling his hair out. He said, I am dealing with 50 countries, it feels like, because of all the regulations and the differences in policies everyone has. And he's like, I don't know how anyone can function in here. And I couldn't help but laugh. Terry, I wanted to circle back with you because you had something, a keynote last year that I caught. And you talked about being a modern day superhero. Now, Katia was talking earlier about using data for social good. So I want to get your thoughts on how can we use data for good in financial services in your sense?
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily limited to just financial services. The way that I talked about it in my keynote was around the people that we deal with, or the people that we have on our teams, or the people that we interact with on a daily basis have such a specialized skill today that I think that I liken it to a superpower. And we've got powers that not everyone else that we work with in the business space has available to them. And I think that, we might be doing some modeling inside of our own company to better predict, who's going to buy something, or better predict who's going to call about something else. But what I said is we should be taking a step back as individuals, and we should be saying, how can we take the skills that we use in our lives every single day of the week and apply them to good? And that good can be in financial services, things like helping prevent human trafficking. So we as an organization and across the industry, we make people available to go and work with not-for-profits and charities. That would be one example, but there's food banks and all these other things where they'd be lucky to have even the largest ones would be lucky to have a single individual that are focused on data. What we can do is we can actually come in and we can say, here's 5 people, or here's 10 people, or here's an army of people that will come in for a day, a week, a month, depending on what they can absorb, and say, give us your data, what are you trying to do, and let us help you. Let us help you find where your donors might be. Let us help you optimize the routes that your cars are going to go, clothing or food drives or those kinds of things. And when you step back and you think about it, you should, as our listeners, our viewers are probably thinking, look, I've got those skills. I want to contribute. There's a lot of organizations out there. There is an organization called Data for Good. There are a number of them across the United States, Canada, and around the world, where you can actually volunteer your time and help these kinds of organizations. What we did maybe this time last year is we actually, inside of our own organization, because we do work with a number of charities that are closely aligned to our purpose and things that were key to our being, and it's called the Run for the Cure. So we actually created a competition with our own organization, and we had 5 or 6 different teams, and we said, here's some data related to this particular cause. What can we go back to these particular charities, in this particular case, to this particular charity, and say something that they probably never knew, just that was existing within the data that they were able to provide us. So we provided them with data, anonymized data. The charity provided us with information about size of donations, things like that, and we were able to go back and run this competition. And we went back finally with the quote unquote winning team, and provided them with the information. They were like astounded that we were able to do something at no cost to them, frankly, like literal no cost to them. It probably took us 3-4 weeks to get the teams rallied and organized. And then we provided the tools themselves for visualization, and we were be able to put it onto a Tableau dashboard in this particular case to say, look, let's show you where your donors are. Let's show you what the average donor is. Let's show you how you could potentially change your wording. It doesn't have to be just about the data. And I think that if only 50% of the people watching this right now went out and volunteered their time, they're especially right now with COVID, donations are down across the board. These organizations are struggling. They could absolutely use the skills of the people listening right now. So please, take a day, take a Saturday, take a Sunday, take whatever day that you could make available, and go visit a local charity or not-for-profit. And I think that you would be astounded at how much good you could actually do.
I love that story. I was gonna say, just keep going. I can listen to this all day long, Terry. I think it resonates a lot because no action is too small, right? A lot of times when we think about the
Right.
immense challenges that we have day to day, millions of people are still without jobs. A lot of them are facing eviction, and there are people that are waiting in food banks. I remember reading perhaps a month ago that one of the largest food bank in the United States, they got their demand has doubled literally so far already. So there is so much going on, and yet I feel hopeful that just every single little bit of action from every one of us, we can make a difference. And so that is a really, really important message. Um, if there is anything, everyone that's watching, that the one takeaway is no action is too small. Do something good with what you have.
Yeah, I always think of that quote from Mother Teresa, which is, if you can't feed 100, then just feed one. And I think about it all the time, because as a data scientist, especially if you are a big data scientist, which I happen to be, you start to minimize your impact, right? You start to think, well, what could I do? Just me. Especially if you're in a big team. Like, I had 600 data scientists working with me. And so you don't really, and a lot of us have imposter syndrome. So we don't even think we can help, which is a part of the problem. We won't even raise our hands. So I just think it's such an opportunity to just go, and I love the idea of just having informational with these companies. Like, go and talk to them, and you might uncover the fact, oh, wait, that's the problem you're trying to solve? Well, I can solve that problem. But I absolutely do believe that, like, if we all didn't necessarily have this kind of macro idea, oh, I want to start a business, or I want to create, a startup. Like, what if I just had one conversation with somebody and leveraged what I know in my life to help them? Like you just said, Theo, every conversation, every little bit helps. So yeah, I'm very encouraging to those who want to reach out and help, especially in this time, because I don't think we realize how special our super Terry.
Yes, superpowers. And
yeah, I mean, one thing that
starting a company, I'm doing it with you, lady.
One thing I found very helpful to this purpose is certainly to create within the organizations we are working in this kind of excitement, but also formal encouragement for our data scientists and the teams we lead to volunteer that time. So actually give them time off, whether it's 10%, 15%, 20%, encourage it. Don't make it seem like a pet project, but make it seem as important as the formal revenue driving projects. Then publicize the work, help the world see how important it is, including in your own company. That helps advance research in our field.
Yeah.
It certainly makes a difference, like you just said, and it inspires people to stay with a company that encourages it. So there's absolutely a clear win-win here, and we can all do it. And I imagine we are all doing it.
I'm just gonna feel really happy right now. I think we can wrap. So it brings me to something else, right? That has been happening in the United States specifically around racial justice or injustice. We've all read stories about banking while Black or banking while Latino, and we're all aware of systemic inequality that we have. It's not just one bank, is not one industry, is not one company. It's been years and years and decades. And so, and with COVID-19, with the recession, a lot of these households, they are facing even more pressure, if you will, from potential evictions, loan defaults. And so it is even more critical than ever that the system that we use to determine, for example, who gets access to credit and who gets access to loan restructuring and who can be eligible for economic relief, that we know, and trying to eliminate as much as we can human biases. But the challenge is that oftentimes machine learning, what it's doing is reflecting and amplifying, unfortunately, historical patterns that we have in our society in terms of discrimination, in terms of, how we've been treating different populations and demographics. And it's getting even harder to see when it's quote unquote inside a box, right? And so I would love to hear from all of you. What are some of the practical tips and actions that you can offer as individuals as well as companies to help to reduce the impact of it? And so let's start with Ms. Noelle. Since you've been with several big tech companies and you've recently started your endeavor with an educational institution trying to change it from the beginning. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I as part of the company I'm currently working with, HackerU, we are building university education and change. We're literally trying to change the DNA of engineering teams, because I do think that that's a big part of it. But there is like bias can actually be, it's impacted by the entire pipeline of artificial intelligence or model development. It starts from the day you hire, and I built several teams, but hire and build the team, the diversity of thought that you wait for in order to build that team, the team that does the data collection, the team that actually builds and deploys the model, the team, and these are not, especially in large companies, the same people. So you have to have this constant lens of diversity. And, you know, do I have someone at this table that is looking at this model, looking at the accuracy metrics, and are they seeing it through the lens of the constituents that I might be ignoring, or that we as a collective might be ignoring? Many of us know that our industry is homogeneous in nature. Like, I look around and there's not a lot of curly haired brown girls like in my industry, but that doesn't mean there can't be. And it also doesn't mean that we can't solve the problem just because that exists. There are ways to solve this. And one challenge I find is that when we have a model that has bias in it, to your point about, like, then what do we do? Sometimes the choice, especially today, is to actually stop doing the thing, right? Like, oh, I have a AI, maybe an artificially or a facial recognition model. And rather than thinking about how do I fix this model, if that facial recognition model is actually building out, creating a bad result, or a result that marginalizes an entire community of people, some companies are choosing to not do that work anymore, as opposed to actually the ethical choice, right? Do I quit, meaning that I'm now, at least I'm not hurting anyone anymore because I quit doing the work? Or do I take a step back and really invest in doing it right, which is more expensive, will likely crush your margins? So how do we really, like, I think that's the crux of the decision is, sure, you could quit a model that's not working well, or you could actually invest in those models. Either you invest from the beginning when you build the team, or as soon as you realize that those models do not have a diverse data set, are producing results that are not inclusive or representative of your users, maybe then you have to actually go back and invest more money. And I always say this, diversity is expensive. That's the truth of it. You have to wait for the right people. You have to invest in the right data. You have to wait for that data to get collected, which ultimately increases the cost of the solution. But isn't that what we're here for, right? What kind of a solution doesn't do those things, right? Doesn't meet the needs of the constituents that we're trying to serve. So yeah, that's my perspective. Is it's multifaceted, but I don't think quitting is the answer.
But it's hard.
I fully agree.
Doing, right, Katia?
Yeah, I fully agree with Noelle, and it's hard work that's worth doing. There are a couple of things that I'd like to add to expand on this, on the topic of diversity and how important it is. And I think you mentioned that, Noelle. There's diversity in the team that we need to have, and not just in gender and race, but also nationality and background and skills and perspectives. Data scientists come from all kinds of backgrounds in the world. Yes, we have lots of engineers, but I've also had team members on my teams. I have one former professional poker player. I have a philosophy major. I've had physicists and literally rocket scientists. I've had social science majors. I am a statistician myself. So it's that diversity of thought that's really important, and that stems from backgrounds, including racial background. There's also diversity of data. We cannot underestimate the value of just aggregating all kinds of data together. It's amazing what kinds of insights we can drive just by putting together data sets that have never met before. And I can give you more examples if you'd like, but for now I'll stick to diverse teams, diverse data sets, and then, of course, diverse tools. What's a wonderful blessing in our field is that so much is happening so quickly. Just in the last few minutes that we've been talking, new things have advanced and been discovered and will be implemented. And it's upon us, as Noelle said, not to quit, but actually to harness these things and make them better. So that's on diversity. Then there's a second tool, which is about ethics. And we touched a little bit about that. And of course, the whole panel is about technology and ethics. But ethics is about ethical people and how we hire. And that's something that I know the right companies with the right clear purpose that we talked about earlier screen for. We cannot do that enough. So when I hire, for example, I look certainly for sophisticated technical skills, but I also look for values and integrity. And these are difficult things to measure. And there are different ways in which to probe them. And sometimes one or two will slip through. But for the most part, I've been blessed to be able to create teams that really uphold ethics and consumer privacy and using data for good, all these things that we've talked about, and diversity very near and dear. And so, yes, we want the controls and the ethical practices, but we also want the ethical people. And that connects with the third thing, which is company culture. A culture that demonstrates overall that it values diversity, that it does everything it can to advance diversity, that it does what our CEO of Levi, Strauss & Company, Chip Bergh, says: it is better to do the harder right than the easier wrong. And we've always chosen to do just that. So a company that has a culture rooted in values is much more likely to create diversity, to attract ethical people, and to stimulate advancements in this field. So I hope these are some practical tools that we can all help further.
Yeah, and Katia, I totally agree with you that culture is so important. And just to kind of tag on to what you just said, maybe taking it a step further, what I've seen some companies start to do, and it's pretty hard, but to really attach that importance of ethics to compensation structures. So not just having your compensation based off of how much a particular product is succeeding, but having within those matrices, how are you completing, are you looking at it in an ethical way? Who are you helping? Are you completing your compliance work? Is that all within the package of it? So essentially also promoting ethics as a main part of your value system rather than just how much money you're making, which is of course also important, but having that as a dual component to it, which I think is really exciting, because I can certainly say 10 years ago, I don't think we would have seen that, but now it really is part of that. And I think it is because that is part of the value proposition of a company now, is what are your ethics? So I think it's an exciting development.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to add one aspect of, creating these teams and even in the culture of a company, something I noticed recently, which kind of was jarring, especially since my career has shifted dramatically towards artificial intelligence, is that I don't work with very many people that have physical disabilities, that have cerebral palsy or have even cognitive disabilities. And the fact that I've in 25 years have worked with virtually none, it really caused it gave me an ethical question. Not only why didn't I notice, number one, and then why are they not even in the pipeline? I don't even interview them, to be honest. I've never interviewed someone with cerebral palsy or in a wheelchair. And so and then I think about I'm building this software, and actually one of my main tenets of many of the software components I have built has been to be accessible to these exact audiences. So I just think it's interesting, as you were mentioning, both of you, around culture, but also this diversity of team, that it's in all the things. Of course, it's diversity of thought, and I have some of my favorite data scientists or sociology professors or psychology professors, or have PhDs in these areas. But then on top of that, what about the actual demographics and psychographics of people that aren't even in the technical field, and how do we get access to their data and their perspective as we build these solutions that ultimately will impact them? Theo, about these models are going to be used to predict financial outcomes for people. And I'm pretty sure it includes people with these disabilities that will have different data patterns than everybody else because of how they use things and how they live their life. So I feel ethically, this is why I love the idea of having guidelines. What are your audiences that you're looking at? How do you know you've counted everyone that needs to be counted? I feel I think every engineer wants to serve everyone, but we don't even have even the scorecard, right, of what that looks like. Kind of to your point, Megan, right? I would love to see a scorecard of right now it's driven by government regulation. My scorecard says, have you complied with this thing or we'll get fined? But what's the other side of that? How do we, what's the other part? What's the other side that's not all the way to the point of government regulation, and how do we accommodate that? I know probably as well as you, Katia, like we implement that individually as leaders who know, but how do we voice that to other leaders who may not have that insight or empathy?
Yep.
This forum is one example.
Yeah, I think you did touch on a really good point though, Noelle, in terms of people that have different abilities, right? Because traditionally in banking, that demographics is actually very not well served. A lot of them are underserved. A lot of them are underbanked. And if we are using all of that as the basis to build our automatic decisioning, we're in trouble, right? Because we are basically using the outcome of something that was biased inherently to begin with. But I want to touch a little bit on similar train of thoughts on fairness, right? And Megan, I actually want to get your take on it. So with all of these that we're talking about, we are aware that we're not perfect and we're building on things that are not perfect. And so CFPB recently, they have announced that they're going to be, they're asking for input on transparency, right? On fairness, all of these things that we're talking about right now. And some of these institutions have come out and say, well, you know, this is how we're dealing with fairness. And when it comes to credit modeling, because we're doing more and more of that automatically. And so it would seem or appear like from regulators, from bankers, lenders, even Silicon Valley, that all feeling they need to do something more because they know that there are things that need to be worked on and challenges. But here's my trouble with it, right? We always talk a lot about, oh yeah, we are aware it's not perfect. And yet we turn around and keep doing the same thing again and again. Oh, yep, we know we're not perfect. And then you go back. So being able to take action and make progress is different than being aware of some challenges. So from your perspective, what do you think is going to happen? Noelle touched a little bit on regulation and you know, are we complying with government guidelines and all of that? Do you think we'll see more regulation in the future in our industry?
I do. I think that changes in industry generally come from three different ways. The first is internally, where you just see that it's something that you want to do with your industry. The second is government regulation. And the third is government enforcement. And I think what we're getting is really a combination of all three of those factors right now. Yeah, I think the CFPB and some of the other issues, a good example of why it came about is we probably all remember, or maybe are having trouble at this point remembering back to November 2019, a whole 10 months ago or so, when it was found that the Apple Card, if you remember, ended up rating women differently than it rated men, even if they had, you know, they were filing joint taxes, etc. And the reason for that was their algorithms and the fact that, you know, algorithms really are a reflection of society and really a mirror to society. And so based off of that, New York decided to take some enforcement action. And then you've seen other banks now saying, no, we're really going to look at fairness, look at how we're putting together algorithms to make sure that they're not disproportionately impacting certain groups. And I think that that's a positive thing. But why did that happen? Well, it's partially probably because Apple got a lot of bad press. And then there was an investigation on the back end. So there was something that really forced that. And there's been investigation about discriminatory housing practices through advertisement and ad tech technology. So this is something that's going to continue. And I can definitely say in the US, I always feel that, frankly, enforcement action works really is a huge motivator for companies, or at least it shows them what the rules of the road are going to be. In addition to that, I think that algorithms have the potential to really help others. So one of the things I like that the CFPB pointed out back in 2015 is that if we can take all of this data, we can now allow people, as you mentioned, Theo, who were unbanked and want to become banked, but in this case, especially in the US, what they call credit invisibles, who don't have enough data attached to them to actually have credit to enter into the credit society. If you look at additional data sets, or if you increase those data sets, now they're going to have enough data to potentially have credit reports to become credit worthy. So I think it's a really interesting time where you have data sets that can both cause discriminatory action, but at the same time, this possibility of, if you do it correctly, really having this net good for society. You know, the issue is going to be, you know, is this really going to be put forward as something? Are we going to regulate? Who's going to take the enforcement actions? And will we see it early enough to really kind of prevent some of the more adverse outcomes that could happen. So I think it's a really interesting time, but we'll see where it goes in the next coming year. I personally think, depending on the administration coming up, if we have a Democratic administration, we're likely to have more regulation. If we don't, I think that we're likely to have less regulation. That's typically just a trend that we're seeing. I do think that in the next year, hopefully, or 2 years after we have a new Congress, I'm hoping that we will have some additional privacy laws, and especially a national privacy law, because I think that that's something that consumers want. I think it's also something that industry wants, because everybody wants to know what the rules of the road are.
We need something to build on, right? I think that's the challenge right now. Terry, I want to hear from you though, from your vantage point, because we had talked a little bit, between Canada and the U.S. and also Europe. Europe seems to be a little bit further ahead in terms of a lot of the rules regarding data privacy and what we can do, what we cannot do. What are some of the key differences that you see between all of these demographics areas?
Yeah, so I think Europe has clearly led the way from a GDPR perspective. I think that what we'll end up seeing as the best things out of the GDPR regulations will actually start to make its way towards North America. There is intent in there. And part of the things that we suffer from, for the most part in North America, is the lack of regulation in this area. So you're not really sure, can you do this? Should you do this? Are my clients expecting that I'm going to be doing that? And some sort of guidelines or statute would provide the clarity that Megan was just talking about, that organizations are looking for. They don't want to overstep, and so sometimes I think people may not go up to that line as a result of that. I think that at least from a Canadian perspective, we're going to talk. If we talk about banking for a moment. We've got, from a regulator perspective here, our regulators have been very clear around not using black boxes to make decide whether or not someone should get a mortgage or a credit card or these kinds of things. They're looking for explainability in the models that we're using, which is absolutely the appropriate way to do this. I think that we owe it as financial institutions to our clients to be able to explain that these were the inputs, this was the outcome, and we can explain all of the rationale behind that. And it wasn't that some machine just spit out that it was 65% confident that this was the right answer. So I think we'll start to see that. We'll start to see more regulation and maybe a little bit loosening of that, where some level of black box may be allowed in the future, but here today it's not something that we have available to us. The other thing that I would say is that organizations, we should be taking responsibility, and we should be creating our own code of ethics. So we've got something called the ethical use of data. In the absence of industry creating something, I think that we have to band together to decide how we're going to do that. And the more organizations that get together to do it, I think that we won't be on our own. So financial institutions are getting together to say, this is what we believe it means to us. And the lack of, if the government's not going to tell us, then we're going to start telling people this is how we think it's going to go. Sorry, Katia, you were going to say?
That's exactly what I wanted to say, actually, that regulation is one thing, but ethics has always been a different field from the law. And what's great about ethics is that it would actually propel us to do things that the law may not be ready or even explicitly prohibit. But I want to remind everyone that we always need to do the right thing and add human intelligence to artificial intelligence, and it's upon us to do that. So, for example, I do come from Europe, but I was working there until last year. The company I was working with at the time, I started there in 2015, and we implemented practices that were at and above the standard of ethics that were later implemented through the General Data Protection Regulation, which then came to California, and we now have the California Consumer Protection Act. But that was done 2-3 years before regulators required us to do that, so much so that the European Commission issued a special recognition and award for privacy to that company, which was a big data company, and it's unheard of. So not only do we do the right thing for the company and the consumers, it actually helps us as an industry, and we can even do more with data, but we have to separate ethics from regulation and do everything we can with human intelligence and ethics to advance artificial intelligence and ethics.
I love that. And before we wrap, we're going to go with a lightning round of really quick questions. In 5 words, what does ethics mean to you? And we'll wrap after that. So Megan, go first.
Oh my. Accountability, aspiration, hopefulness, protection, and this isn't one word, but I would say the future.
Perfect. All right, Terry?
I'm not going to count my words because I don't want to do that. Never betraying the trust of our clients.
Ooh, like that. All right, Katia?
Always do the right thing.
Love it. And Noelle?
I love that. That's simple and sweet. Being an ambassador for truth.
The ambassador of truth. And for me, it's be true to your own values. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Please do stay here for the closing keynotes and closing remarks. But thank you, Katia. Thank you, Megan and Terry and Noelle for joining us for a wonderful technology and ethics panel. I can literally keep talking, but I think they're going to cut us off. So thank you again.
Bye. Thanks so much.